The hiss of hydraulics echoed through the landing bay as Dax Carter stepped off the transport shuttle. The air was thick with a metallic tang, a reminder of the countless vessels that came and went from this sprawling galactic hub. His boots clicked against the polished obsidian floor, the sound swallowed quickly by the immensity of the space. Above him, translucent domes stretched into the void, revealing the swirling blue-green haze of Centaurus Prime's atmosphere. The Galactic War Academy loomed ahead like a fortress of glass and steel, a symbol of unity, progress, and for Dax, a battleground where he would be underestimated at every turn. "Move it, human!" growled a towering alien as it shoved past him, its reptilian scales catching the artificial light. The force nearly knocked Dax off balance, but he caught himself, gripping the strap of his duffel bag with fingers that had turned white. He didn't respond. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. He took a deep breath, the recycled air carrying faint notes of something acrid, oil, ozone, and a trace of sulfur. It was a stark contrast to Earth's fresh winds, but it was fitting. This was alien territory, and he was an anomaly in it. Around him, cadets of every conceivable species filled the cavernous halls, their voices mingling in a cacophony of languages and tonal frequencies. Dax's ears picked up snippets of conversation, snippets of disdain. "Can you believe it? A human? They're practically primitive." Must be a political move. A flicker of doubt pressed against Dax's thoughts, but he shoved it aside. He had worked for this. Sweat, blood, and sleepless nights. He wasn't here by accident. He tightened his jaw and stepped into the orientation hall. The space was impossibly vast, its high ceilings veined with glowing conduits that pulsed like arteries. Holographic banners hung in midair, depicting the Academy's legacy. Glorious battles, noble sacrifices, and victories against enemies that Dax could hardly fathom. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, layered with something deeper like burnt plasma. From a perch above, a voice pierced the air, sharp and chirping. "Well, look what the gravitational pull dragged in." Dax glanced up to see a Nelan, a wiry, insectoid creature with wings that shimmered like fractured rainbows. Its compound eyes glinted with mischief. "I didn't realize this academy was taking charity cases." Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. Dax felt his cheeks flush hot, but he kept walking, refusing to meet their eyes. "Careful, Zix," rumbled a voice nearby. A Kronxian cadet, crystalline and imposing, leaned lazily against a support pillar. His voice had the resonance of a distant avalanche. "Don't damage the Academy's new pet project. They break easily." The insult hung in the air like a knife poised to strike. Dax's fingers itched to clench into fists, but instead he forced a grin. "We might not regrow limbs or secrete toxins," he said, his voice light, almost casual. "But we've survived just fine without them." His tone carried no malice, only quiet defiance. The Kronxian tilted his head, his facets catching the light in dazzling patterns. "Bold words, human. Let's hope you're worth the effort." The murmurs quieted as the hologram of Commandant Axor materialized at the center of the hall. The Celestian's nebulous form glowed faintly, its swirling particles radiating authority. "Welcome, recruits," it boomed, its voice resonating in a way that seemed to vibrate through Dax's very bones. "You are the finest your species has to offer. Together you will forge the future of the Galactic Defense Force." The Commandant's gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on Dax. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd, as if they were witnessing something unnatural. "Some of you come from warrior races," the hologram continued, eliciting murmurs of approval from the Kronxians. "Others from species of unparalleled intellect." The Mirians, with their sleek cybernetic enhancements, nodded with pride. "And some," it paused, "from civilizations we are still learning to understand." A few snickers broke out. Dax felt every eye in the room on him. His chest tightened, but he kept his face neutral, his thoughts a storm of anger and determination. They wanted to laugh? Fine. He'd let them. For now. As the Commandant finished, the room transitioned to chaos, cadets dispersing toward their assigned quarters. Dax weaved through the crowd, his senses on overdrive. He felt the faint hum of the floor beneath his boots, the ambient buzz of a dozen alien languages, the flicker of light reflecting off crystalline bodies and polished exoskeletons. Inside his assigned quarters, the air was cooler, tinged with a faint metallic bite. The walls shifted subtly, adapting to his presence, and the bed morphed into a vaguely human-like mattress. Dax tossed his duffel onto it with a sigh, staring out the quantum glass window. Beyond, the Academy's spires stretched into the sky, their sleek surfaces catching the light of Centaurus Prime's 3 moons. "Begin cadet profile scan," he said aloud. The room's AI flickered to life, its voice monotone and clinical. Species, human. Enhanced capabilities, none detected. Biological limitations, multiple. Threat assessment, minimal. The words felt like a slap. Dax laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the small room. "We'll see about that," he muttered, his voice low, but with an edge that promised defiance. His gaze shifted to the moons, their pale light casting long shadows across the Academy grounds. Somewhere out there, wars were being fought, galaxies torn apart. And here he was, mocked and underestimated, standing on the precipice of something far greater than himself. The faint scent of ozone lingered in the air, a reminder of the immense power coursing through the Academy's systems. The walls hummed softly, a subtle rhythm that seemed almost alive. Dax leaned back against the bed, letting his exhaustion wash over him for a moment. Tomorrow, the real tests would begin. But tonight, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the moment, the cold air against his skin, the hum of alien machinery, and the faint, bitter taste of isolation that clung to his thoughts. He clenched his fists, his resolve hardening like tempered steel. They didn't know it yet, but they had underestimated him. For the last time, Dax woke to the shrill chime of the Academy alarm. The synthetic voice of the AI announced the start of the day, its tone cold, clinical. His muscles ached from the strain of travel and the tension of being perpetually on edge. The metallic tang of the recycled air seemed sharper now, as though even the oxygen in this place was designed to remind him he didn't belong. He rolled off the morphic bed and splashed water on his face from the sleek alien sink. The water was cool but carried a faint, mineral aftertaste that made his mouth tighten. He stared into the polished surface of the mirror-like wall, his reflection pale against the sterile glow of the room. "You're still here," he muttered to himself. The words weren't encouragement. They were a challenge. The hallways of the Academy bustled with activity, cadets moving with synchronized precision. The din of 100 conversations in as many languages filled the space, accompanied by the faint hum of energy fields and the occasional click of claws against the sleek floor. Dax felt the stares, the whispers that prickled like static against his skin. He didn't flinch. If they wanted to watch, he'd give them something to talk about. His first stop was the combat arena, a sprawling dome that seemed to defy physics. The walls shimmered with energy, the air charged with anticipation. The ground shifted under his boots, recalibrating for the day's exercise. The faint smell of burnt ozone mingled with the earthy musk of sweat from earlier sessions. "Today's simulation," Lieutenant Vrex announced, her serpentine form coiled with a dangerous grace, "is a test of adaptability. Fail, and you might as well not show up tomorrow." Her voice was sharp, each word a lash that seemed to strike the cadets into attention. Dax scanned the faces of his peers. Orvac, the Kronxian, stood motionless, his crystalline body refracting light into faint rainbows. Nearby, Silix, an avian with iridescent feathers, adjusted her combat harness, her sharp eyes glancing briefly at him before dismissing his presence. To them, he was a novelty, one that would burn out soon enough. The simulation began without warning. The arena transformed in an instant, its floor morphing into jagged terrain. Lava fissures cut through the ground, spewing heat that stung Dax's skin. Above, storm clouds churned, their thunderclaps loud enough to rattle his bones. Dax moved instinctively, his boots skidding on loose gravel as he avoided a sudden burst of molten rock. His breath came in short gasps, each inhale filled with the acrid scent of sulfur. Around him, alien cadets seemed to thrive. Orvek's crystalline form withstood the lava's heat as he bulldozed through obstacles. Silix darted overhead, her wings slicing through the air with a hiss, her sharp talons finding impossible footholds. And then there was Dax. He lacked their natural defenses, their evolutionary advantages, but he had something they didn't, a mind that refused to surrender. He crouched low, scanning the simulated chaos for patterns. The lava didn't flow randomly. It followed subtle ridges in the terrain. The storm above wasn't chaotic. It followed a rhythm. He felt the heat against his skin, the sting of sweat dripping into his eyes, but his focus sharpened. He moved with purpose, stepping where the lava wouldn't reach, timing his movements to avoid the lightning strikes. When the simulation ended, Dax stood at the far edge of the arena, unscathed but trembling with exhaustion. Around him, the cadets murmured. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but he had crossed the finish line without a single misstep. "Well," Lieutenant Vrex hissed, her eyes narrowing as she slithered closer, "it seems the human has some instincts after all. Let's see if they're more than just beginner's luck." The words stung, but Dax nodded. Let them doubt him. He had no intention of proving them right. Later that day, he found himself in the Academy's technology lab, a stark contrast to the chaos of the arena. The air was cooler here, carrying a faint hum of energy that buzzed against his skin. The walls were lined with consoles and holographic displays that blinked with alien symbols, their meaning indecipherable to Dax. His hands hovered over the interface, his fingers itching to act, but the tools felt foreign, the process frustratingly slow. "Having trouble, human?" a Marian cadet sneered, her cybernetic enhancements gleaming under the lab's sterile light. She moved with a calculated precision, her hands merging seamlessly with the console as she interfaced directly with the system. Dax exhaled sharply, his gaze fixed on the screen in front of him. "Not everyone can cheat by plugging themselves in." Her laugh was a sharp, metallic sound. "It's not cheating, it's evolution. Something your kind seems to have skipped." Dax didn't respond. He focused instead on the labyrinth of data before him, his mind working through the logic step by step. He could hear the faint clicks of others working, the whispered conversations, the occasional hiss of frustration. The room smelled faintly of heated circuits, a sterile scent that made his eyes water. He spotted a pattern, a weakness in the encryption the others had overlooked in their rush to integrate. His fingers danced over the controls, inputting commands with an efficiency that surprised even him. A chime signaled success, and his screen blinked green. He turned to find the Mirian staring at him, her expression unreadable. "Lucky guess," she muttered, but the edge in her voice told him otherwise. That night, Dax found himself wandering the Academy's lower levels, drawn by a need to escape the constant scrutiny. The air here was different, heavier, and carried the faint scent of oil and something older, rust maybe. The hum of the upper levels was distant, replaced by the faint creak of old machinery. He turned a corner and stopped. Ahead, tucked into a shadowed alcove, was a room that didn't belong. The door was heavy, mechanical, and lacked the sleek design of the rest of the Academy. Dax pushed it open, his muscles straining against the resistance, and stepped inside. The space was dimly lit, the air stale. Screens lined the walls, their displays flickering with fragmented data. In the center of the room stood a holographic table, its surface projecting an incomplete star map. Dax approached, his breath catching as he recognized something. The Veilborn fleet. He didn't know how he knew. Perhaps it was the sharp, angular design of the ships, or the faint symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie light, but the realization settled over him like a lead weight. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the projection. It rippled, shifting to reveal another image, an attack plan. His stomach clenched as he read the coordinates. The Academy was a target. Behind him, a faint sound, a scuff of boots, the hiss of breath. He turned, his pulse hammering. The shadows seemed to shift, a figure stepping into the faint light. "You weren't supposed to see this," the figure said, their voice low, each word carrying a weight that made Dax's chest tighten. "Who are you?" Dax asked, his voice steady despite the fear that prickled at the edge of his thoughts. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they moved closer, the light catching the edge of their uniform. A cadet's uniform, one of his peers, a traitor. Dax's heart pounded as the realization hit him. He wasn't just fighting for acceptance anymore. The academy itself was in danger, and he was running out of time. The air in the dimly lit war room turned colder as Dax locked eyes with a shadowed figure. The faint hum of ancient machinery throbbed beneath the floor, a rhythmic pulse that felt like the beating heart of something dangerous and alive. His muscles tensed, his breath shallow. Every instinct screamed at him to move, but he stood frozen, caught in the gravity of the moment. "Step away from the terminal," the cadet said, their voice low and sharp, like the edge of a blade slicing through the stillness. They moved closer, their boots whispering against the metallic floor, the faint scent of burnt ozone lingering in their wake. "Why are you doing this?" Dax asked, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. The flickering holographic map cast shifting shadows across the room, painting the figure in fractured light. The cadet tilted their head, their expression unreadable. "It's not about you, human. It's never been about you. You were just convenient." Before Dax could respond, the lights in the room dimmed further, and a sharp mechanical screech echoed from the walls. The screens flared to life, filling the air with distorted static and a chorus of garbled voices. The holographic map pulsed violently, the Veilborn fleet expanding outward like an unstoppable wave. A shiver ran down Dax's spine. He turned back to the projection, his stomach sinking as he recognized the pattern. The fleet wasn't just targeting the academy, it was coordinating a galaxy-wide assault. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. Before he could act, the cadet lunged, their movements swift and precise. Dax barely managed to dodge, his boots skidding against the slick floor. He grabbed a loose metal rod from the nearby console, its cool surface biting into his palm. The cadet struck again, their blows calculated and relentless, their breathing eerily calm. "You don't understand," they hissed, their voice edged with desperation. "You're fighting something you can't stop." "Maybe not," Dax shot back, deflecting another strike. "But I can make damn sure you don't help them." The fight was short, brutal. Dax's knuckles split against the cadet's jaw, the impact reverberating up his arm. The cadet staggered, their balance faltering for a moment too long. Seizing the chance, Dax grabbed their uniform collar and slammed them against the wall. The thud echoed through the room, the faint scent of sweat and iron mingling in the air. "Who else is involved?" Dax demanded, his voice a harsh growl. "How deep does this go?" The cadet smirked, blood trickling from the corner of their mouth. "You'll find out soon enough." Before Dax could press further, the terminal behind him erupted in a cascade of sparks, the map disintegrating into chaos. A deafening alarm blared through the walls, the sound drilling into his skull. "Warning! External breach detected," the AI's voice announced, its usual monotone replaced by a sharp urgency. "Hostile forces approaching." The cadet wrenched free of Dax's grip, their movements impossibly fast. Before he could react, they vanished into the shadows, leaving only the faint echo of their steps behind. Dax stared after them, his chest heaving, the acrid scent of scorched circuits stinging his nose. He bolted from the room, the cold air of the lower levels slicing against his skin as he ran. The corridors were alive with flashing red lights and the chaotic shouts of cadets. The floor vibrated beneath his boots, each tremor a harbinger of the incoming assault. When he emerged into the main atrium, the scene was a whirlwind of activity. Alien cadets scrambled to their posts, their voices a symphony of panic and determination. The scent of charged plasma filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Dax caught sight of Orvac, his crystalline body glinting under the emergency lights as he barked orders to a group of Kronxians. "Dax!" Orvac's voice cut through the chaos like a shard of ice. "The Veilborn fleet is here. Their first wave hit the outer defenses 10 minutes ago." "Then why are we still standing around?" Dax snapped, his pulse pounding in his ears. "Because they're inside," Orvac said, his tone grim. The Academy's shields are compromised. We've got Veil-born infiltrators in the lower sectors. A sharp crack echoed through the atrium, followed by the acrid smell of scorched metal. Dax spun around to see a Veil-born drone, sleek, angular, and bristling with weapons, cutting through a group of cadets. Its movements were fluid, almost organic, its cold blue eyes scanning for the next target. Dax didn't think. He lunged toward a fallen plasma rifle, its weight unfamiliar but welcome in his hands. The weapon hummed with energy, its surface warm against his palms. He took aim, his fingers steady, and fired. The blast struck the drone's central core, sending it crumpling to the ground in a shower of sparks. The victory was short-lived. Another drone descended from above, its mechanical limbs clicking with deadly precision. Dax dove behind a console, the searing heat of a plasma bolt grazing his shoulder. The pain was sharp, electric, but he forced himself to focus. His breaths came quick and shallow, the metallic taste of adrenaline coating his tongue. "Cover me!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. Orvac responded without hesitation, his crystalline arms splitting into jagged shards that hurled toward the drone with lethal force. The distraction was enough. Dax darted forward, his boots pounding against the floor as he closed the distance. With a grunt, he slammed the butt of the rifle into the drone's head, its glowing eyes flickering before going dark. The atrium fell momentarily silent, the air heavy with the scent of burnt metal and fear. Dax straightened, his muscles taut, his gaze sweeping the room. The cadets stared at him, their expressions a mix of shock and something else, respect. "Don't just stand there," he barked. "They're not done yet." Orvac stepped forward, his crystalline form casting fractured light across the room. "We need to regroup," he said, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "The infiltrators are targeting the command center. If they take it, we lose everything." Dax nodded, his grip tightening on the rifle. His mind raced, each thought a sharp fragment cutting through the chaos. They weren't prepared for this. The Academy's reliance on advanced systems had made them vulnerable, predictable. But Dax knew how to fight without the crutch of technology. He knew how to survive. "Let's move," he said, his voice firm. "We're not letting them win." As they headed toward the command center, the corridors seemed darker, the air heavier. The faint hum of energy that once filled the Academy was gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The distant sounds of battle echoed faintly, a haunting reminder of what was at stake. Dax's chest tightened as they approached the reinforced doors. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the cold air biting at his skin. Beyond those doors lay the heart of the Academy, and the Veil-born's ultimate target. He exchanged a glance with Orvac, the unspoken question lingering between them. Were they ready for what came next? Dax tightened his grip on the rifle, his jaw set. Ready or not, they didn't have a choice. The reinforced doors of the command center loomed ahead, their matte surface reflecting faint traces of emergency lights. Dax pressed his ear to the cold metal, straining to hear through the thick barrier. The muffled hum of machinery whispered within, punctuated by occasional bursts of static from the Veil-born infiltrators' communication devices. His pulse thundered in his ears, the rhythm steady yet laced with anticipation. "Orvac," Dax whispered, his voice barely audible. "How many drones are we dealing with?" Orvac crouched beside him, his crystalline form dim under the red glow of the corridor's emergency lighting. He tilted his head, his facets refracting faint traces of light. "I counted at least 6 patrolling outside the core servers. Their movements are methodical, likely automated. The Veil-born themselves. Harder to say. 2, maybe 3. Their heat signatures are faint, masked by their tech." Dax exhaled, his breath warm against the cold air. Around them, the faint metallic tang of overheated circuits mixed with the sour musk of fear emanating from the group of cadets who had followed them. His eyes flicked to Silix, the avian scout perched silently in the shadows, her wings folded tightly against her back. "Silix," he said, his voice firmer now. "Can you get eyes on the infiltrators? We need to know how they're guarding the servers." Her sharp eyes narrowed. "I'll need a diversion. Those drones are keyed to motion. They'll spot me the moment I move." Dax's mind churned, piecing together fragments of information like a shattered mirror. The room was their next battlefield, and every second they delayed allowed the Veilborn to tighten their grip on the Academy systems. "We'll give you the opening," Dax said, his gaze shifting to Orvac. "Your shards? Can they scatter the drones without giving away our location?" Orvac's crystalline body shimmered faintly as he considered. "If I keep the blast low yield, yes. I'll need a line of sight, though." "Done." Dax turned to the others, his voice taking on a new edge. "This is how we're going to play it. Orvac will draw their attention with precise hits. Silix, you'll use the distraction to get a full visual of the Veilborn's position and relay it to me. Everyone else, stay out of sight until we know what we're dealing with. If you so much as breathe too loudly, this is over." The faint tremor in his chest steadied as he glanced at each face. They were scared, some trembling, others biting down on their nerves, but they were listening. He drew strength from their fragile trust and the weight of their shared purpose. Orvac rose first, his jagged limbs flexing as faint glimmers of light began to collect along his arms. The air around him buzzed with energy, an almost imperceptible hum that set Dax's teeth on edge. He nodded once, his expression sharp, and then launched 3 shards in rapid succession. The crystal fragments ricocheted down the hallway, striking the metal walls with sharp, resonant cracks that sent echoes bouncing through the corridor. The drones reacted immediately. Their angular bodies shifted into motion, their limbs unfolding with a series of sharp clicks. The whir of servos filled the space, accompanied by the eerie glow of their optical sensors scanning the area. They moved toward the sound, their paths converging like predators honing in on prey. Silix was already gone, her movements so fluid they seemed more like shadow play than reality. The faint whisper of her wings slicing through the still air was the only sign of her presence as she vanished into the command center. Dax held his breath, the quiet tension around him thick enough to taste. Seconds stretched into eternity. The distant whir of the drones continued, their mechanical rhythm both alien and unnervingly precise. Finally, Silix's voice crackled through the comm link in his ear, her tone clipped and urgent. 6 drones patrolling the perimeter, 2 Veilborn at the core server. They're integrating some kind of hardware. It's pulsing with an unstable energy signature. Whatever they're doing, it's not compatible with our systems." Dax's mind raced. The Veilborn weren't just sabotaging the Academy. They were repurposing it. His stomach twisted as he imagined the catastrophic fallout of such an integration. The servers controlled everything: the Academy's life support, defenses, and quantum communications. If the Veilborn succeeded, they wouldn't just cripple the Academy, they could weaponize it. "Can you disable the drones?" he asked, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "Not without tripping their fail-safe protocols," Silix replied. "They're synced to the Veilborn signal. Take out the controllers, and the drones go dark." Dax nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then that's our target. Orvac, we need precise strikes on the drones to keep them scattered. Silix, once we engage, take out the controllers. Liran." He turned to the Mirian engineer, who had been silently monitoring the exchange, her cybernetic eyes glowing faintly. "Can you override the core systems once they're down?" Liran's metallic fingers twitched as she considered. "It'll take time. Their tech is embedding itself into our infrastructure. I'll need to isolate the corrupted code while maintaining system integrity." "Do what you can," Dax said, his tone firm. "We don't need perfection. We need speed." The faint scent of burnt plasma lingered in the air as Orvac prepared his next attack. The Kronxian's crystalline shards ignited with a faint, fiery glow as he launched them toward the drones. Each shard struck with surgical precision, scattering the machines like startled insects. The corridor lit up with flashes of blue and gold as the drones retaliated, their plasma bolts slicing through the air with searing intensity. Dax moved in the chaos, his steps silent, his breathing controlled. The heat from the plasma bolts singed the air, leaving faint trails of scorched metal in their wake. He could feel the vibrations of the fight beneath his boots, the thrum of the Academy's system struggling against the Veilborn's intrusion. Inside the command center, the Veilborn worked with chilling focus. Their movements were fluid yet calculated, their sleek forms shrouded in faint, iridescent armor that seemed to ripple with energy. Scylla struck first, her talons raking across one Veilborn's exposed neck. The alien staggered, its weapon clattering to the floor with a metallic clang. The second Veilborn reacted swiftly, its blade slicing through the air toward her, but Dax was already moving. He hit the Veilborn with the force of a battering ram, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The alien fought back with inhuman strength, its hands closing around his throat. Dax gasped, the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth as he twisted desperately, his fingers clawing for the knife at his belt. With a sharp thrust, he drove the blade into the Veilborn's side. It hissed in pain, its grip faltering just long enough for him to slam its head into the server console. "Controllers are down!" Scylla shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. The drones froze, their limbs locking in place as the Veilborn signal died. Liren rushed to the console, her cybernetic hands moving with lightning speed as she began isolating the corrupted systems. The room smelled of burning wires and charred flesh, the air thick with heat and tension. "Got it!" Liren cried, her voice triumphant. "The core is stabilizing, but we need to purge the Veilborn's code before it replicates." Dax wiped the blood from his mouth, his chest heaving as he turned to the others. "Do it. We've got their tech. Now we need to figure out what they're planning." As the console's lights dimmed, the faint hum of the Academy's systems returned, steadier now but fragile. The Veilborn's bodies lay motionless, their armor flickering faintly. Dax stared at them, his mind racing with questions. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The glow of the console dimmed as Liren's metallic fingers finished the purge. The command center fell into a heavy silence, punctuated only by the faint hum of stabilized systems. Dax leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling with sharp, labored breaths. The taste of copper lingered in his mouth, mingling with the acrid stench of scorched metal. Around him, his team stood battered but alive, their faces painted with exhaustion and resolve. "We bought ourselves time," Liren said, her voice steady but low. "But not much. That code wasn't just an attack. It was a blueprint. The Veilborn are trying to turn the Academy into a weapon." Dax wiped his face with his sleeve, smearing blood and sweat into a grim mask. "A weapon for what?" His voice cut through the tension, sharp enough to make Scylla glance up from where she crouched near the lifeless Veilborn. "For domination," she replied, her talons clicking against the floor as she stood. "This isn't an invasion. It's a warning shot. They're showing us how easily they can break us." Orvak's crystalline body caught the dim light, refracting it into faint shards of color. "If they're broadcasting this to their fleet," he said, his voice heavy with thought, "then we have to assume reinforcements are on their way." "They'll be here in hours," Dax said, the weight of it settling over him like a lead cloak. "And if the Academy falls, every colony in this sector will be next." The gravity of the situation pressed down on all of them, palpable as the heat still radiating from the ruined console. Dax pushed off the wall, his shoulders squared despite the ache that pulled at his muscles. "Then we don't let them take it." Scylla arched a feathered brow. "You have a plan, or are we winging it?" Her tone was edged with sarcasm, but her sharp gaze betrayed something deeper, a faint flicker of belief. Dax stepped to the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over his team. "We hit them where it hurts. If they're using the Academy as a broadcasting hub, that means they need this place intact. We turn their plan against them." Liren's glowing eyes flickered with hesitation. "You're suggesting we lure their fleet here? A concentrated assault would destroy us." "Not if we control the battlefield," Dax countered, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "We disable their ability to transmit, force them into a ground fight. If we can bottleneck their forces in the lower sectors, we can rig the quantum core to overload, blast them to hell, and take the Academy back." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears. Orvak's crystalline hand flexed, a faint hum vibrating through his form. "That's a dangerous gamble," he said, his tone cautious. "If the overload doesn't work—" "It will," Dax interrupted, his voice firm. "Because it has to. This isn't just about survival anymore. If we stand here and let them take us, we're showing them they're right, that we can't fight back. I don't know about you, but I didn't come here to prove them right." His words hung in the air, their weight pressing into every corner of the room. Silix's wings shifted, her talons tapping once against the floor. "I hate to admit it," she said finally, "but the human has a point." Orvac nodded slowly. "What do you need?" Dax's lips quirked into a faint smile, small, grim, but resolute. "Everything we've got." The plan came together quickly, forged in the fires of desperation. Lyraean worked with Silix to reroute the Academy's internal systems, creating false signals to confuse the Veilborn reinforcements. Orvac led the effort to arm the remaining cadets, his crystalline form moving like a monolith through the chaos of preparation. And Dax pulled every fragment of knowledge, every ounce of determination, and turned it into a plan that balanced on the razor's edge of possibility. When the Veilborn fleet arrived, the Academy was ready. The first wave of drones descended like locusts, their angular forms cutting through the sky with mechanical precision. Plasma bolts rained down, scorching the spires and sending shockwaves through the reinforced structures. Dax stood in the thick of it, the rifle in his hands humming with power. He barked orders over the din of explosions, his voice cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. "Hold the line!" he shouted, his tone commanding. "Make every shot count!" The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and ozone, the heat of the battle pressing against his skin. Around him, cadets fought with everything they had, their movements sharp and deliberate. Orvac's crystalline shards tore through drones like shrapnel, each strike precise and devastating. Silix darted through the chaos, her feathers glinting as she dove into the fray, her talons tearing through the Veilborn infiltrators with deadly grace. Amid the cacophony, the Veilborn themselves descended. Their forms shimmered with iridescent armor, their weapons sleek and deadly. They moved with fluid precision, each step calculated. Dax met them head-on, his rifle a blur of motion as he fired, dodged, and struck with the brutal efficiency of a man who had nothing left to lose. One Veilborn lunged, its blade slicing through the air toward him. Dax sidestepped, the blade grazing his arm with a searing heat. He countered with the butt of his rifle, the impact driving the alien back. The moment stretched, the world narrowing to the clash of bodies and the raw, electric charge of survival. "You're outmatched, human," the Veilborn hissed, its voice a sharp, metallic rasp. "Maybe," Dax growled, his teeth bared, "but we're not done yet." The Veilborn hesitated, and in that heartbeat of hesitation, Dax struck. He drove the rifle into its chest, the force sending it sprawling. He didn't stop to watch it fall. There was no time. The quantum core loomed ahead, its pulsing light a beacon of both salvation and destruction. "Lyran, status!" he barked into his comm. Her voice crackled through the chaos. "Almost there. Just a few more." The line went dead, replaced by static. Dax's stomach twisted, but he pressed forward. The core's energy surged around him, its heat a tangible force that threatened to sear him alive. He reached the controls, his hands trembling as he keyed in the override sequence. "Dax!" Silix's voice cut through the comms. "The fleet? I know," he shouted, his voice raw. "Just hold them off." The core's hum rose to a deafening crescendo, its light blinding. Dax braced himself, his teeth clenched as he pressed the final command. The explosion ripped through the Academy, a cascade of light and sound that swallowed everything. When the dust settled, the Veilborn fleet was gone, their assault shattered by the Academy's desperate stand. Dax lay sprawled on the floor, his body battered but alive. Around him, his team gathered, their faces etched with exhaustion and something else. Victory. Orvac extended a crystalline hand, his expression unreadable. "You did it." "No," Dax said, his voice hoarse. "We did." As he rose, the faint hum of the surviving systems filled the silence. The Academy stood, battered but unbroken. Dax looked at the faces around him, each one marked by the fight, each one alive because of what they had done together. "You showed them," Silix said quietly, her sharp gaze meeting his. Dax's lips quirked into a faint, weary smile. "We showed them." The Veilborn had underestimated them. They had seen only weaknesses, blind to the strength born of unity, of adaptation, of sheer unyielding will. And now the galaxy would know. Humanity had earned its place among the stars.